A high-pitched shriek, a splash, and a furious bubbling curse. That was how Patricia Carmichael's Tuesday afternoon began. It was not, however, how she had planned it. She had planned to stand on the edge of the Rahman family's newly installed pool, meticulously documenting its every flaw with her phone's camera. The gate, a cheap chain-link monstrosity, was unlocked. The fence, a paltry 4 feet tall, was ineffectual. And the water, it was an iridescent, unsettling shade of turquoise. A testament to the Rahman's questionable taste and blatant disregard for the aesthetic integrity of the Glenwood Estates community. This wasn't a pool. It was a blight, a public hazard and waiting. Patricia, or Patty as her husband had foolishly tried to nickname her, a name she'd swiftly and decisively eradicated from his vocabulary, was the head of the Homeowners Association's Architectural Review Committee. Her domain was order, her currency was conformity, and her nemesis was anything that dared to deviate from the pristine, beige-tone vision of suburban perfection she had carefully cultivated. The Rahmans, the new Pakistani family in the neighborhood, were her latest, most flagrant challenge. The moment she'd heard the sound of construction, the whir of machinery, and the distant shouts of men speaking in a language she didn't recognize, she had known there would be trouble. Her suspicion had been confirmed when she saw the pool permit application. It was sloppy, incomplete, and filled with a nauseatingly enthusiastic doodle of a cartoon son wearing sunglasses. It was an insult to the very concept of bureaucracy. Now, she stood on the very edge of her victory, her phone held aloft, her voice already forming the meticulously worded email to the rest of the HOA board. The subject line would be urgent. Public hazard at 1222 Elm Street. The body would detail her findings, backed by photographic evidence of this. This lagoon, she leaned in closer, squinting at a stray leaf floating near the surface. It was a maple leaf. The Rahmans hadn't even bothered to install a proper skimmer. Unacceptable. That's when it happened. Her sensible beige loafer caught on a loose paving stone. Her foot slipped. Her arms flailed, the phone flying from her hand in a dramatic arc. For a moment, she was suspended in time, a tableau of suburban indignation. Then gravity, that most unyielding of forces, asserted itself, with a splash that soaked the pristine white roses she'd been cultivating for the neighborhood garden club's annual tours. Patricia Carmichael, the arbiter of all things proper, fell face first into the Rahman's public hazard. The water was shockingly cold. It was also, she noted with a shudder, suspiciously clean. The chlorine stung her eyes as she thrashed, her immaculately coiffed hair now a sodden, clinging mess. She rose, sputtering and gasping, her beige sweater clinging to her in a way that was both unflattering and deeply humiliating. The water sloshed around her, and she felt the gritty sand of the pool floor beneath her feet. She looked up, a furious waterlogged scowl on her face, and that's when she saw them. The Rahman family, Mr. and Mrs. Rahman, their 2 children, and a large, boisterous extended family that seemed to have materialized from thin air word gathered on their back patio, staring at her with a mixture of shock and suppressed amusement. Mrs. Rahman, a woman of formidable presence with a colorful dupatta draped over her shoulders, had her hand clamped over her mouth. The children, a boy and a girl, were openly giggling. But it was Mr. Rahman, a man with a kind face and a neatly trimmed beard, who spoke. "Are you okay, Mrs. Carmichael?" he asked, his voice laced with a confusion that only made her furious. Okay? Was she okay? She was standing in their gaudy pool, dripping wet, her dignity in tatters, and her phone, her precious evidence-gathering phone, was at the bottom of it. No, she was not okay. She was, in fact, the exact opposite of okay. You have to install a proper fence, she sputtered, the chlorine-laced water stinging her throat. Mr. Rahman blinked. We have a fence, Mrs. Carmichael, and a gate. It was unlocked, I believe. He was implying that she had opened it, that she had trespassed. The audacity was breathtaking. I was merely inspecting, she said, trying to regain some semblance of authority. Your pool is a public hazard. The permit was not properly filed. The aesthetic, it is a blight on the community. This, she thought, was a powerful and unassailable argument. The Rahmans, good people that they may be, were clearly ignorant of the finer points of suburban living. They needed her, the steadfast guardian of Glenwood Estates, to guide them, to correct their mistakes. But then, the youngest Rahman child, a girl of about 7, piped up. "Mama says you're a Karen," she announced. Her voice as clear and bright as a bell. The word hung in the air, a verbal grenade. Patricia felt a wave of cold fury wash over her, a feeling far more intense than the cold pool water. The adults, shushed the child, but the damage was done. The word, a symbol of all she detested, entitlement, overreach, meddling, was now attached to her. By a 7-year-old, she scrambled out of the pool, dripping and furious, her mind already racing. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was a personal affront, a challenge. She would not be a Karen. She was Patricia Carmichael, and she would have her revenge. The Rahman family, with their loud relatives, their brightly colored clothes, and their public hazard of a pool, had no idea what was coming. This was just the beginning. The walk back to her house? a pristine beige monument to conformity, was a study in controlled rage. Each squish of her waterlogged loafers, each chilly drop of water that trickled down her back, was a fresh log on the fire of her indignation. She had to act, and she had to act decisively. First, she would need a new phone. Her old one, now a soggy, chlorinated brick at the bottom of the Raman's pool, was a casualty of her mission. She would also need a change of clothes and a very strong cup of Earl Grey tea. As she entered her silent, orderly home, she felt a profound sense of injustice. She had dedicated her life to this community. She had fought tooth and nail to prevent the proliferation of pink flamingos, to ensure that all mailboxes were the approved shade of wrought iron black, and to meticulously police the height of everyone's lawn grass. This was not a power trip. This was a public service. And yet, here she was, ridiculed, trespassed upon, and now, publicly shamed. She went to her office. A room with a large mahogany desk and shelves lined with binders, each one dedicated to a different aspect of HOA governance. She pulled out the binder labeled 1222 Elm St. and opened it to a blank page. She would start by drafting a new letter. Not to the board, not yet. This one would be to the Raman family directly. She would cite every single rule they had broken, from the height of their fence to the unlockable gate. She would include the clause about maintaining the aesthetic harmony of the community. It was a broad, powerful clause, a weapon in her arsenal she had used to great effect in the past. But as she began to type, her fingers flying over the keyboard, she felt a prickle of unease. The image of the little girl's face, the simple, honest statement, "Mama says you're a Karen," flashed in her mind. It was a low blow, a cheap shot, but it had landed with a sickening accuracy. Was she a Karen? The term she knew was a slur against women like her, women who took charge, who made sure things were done right. But she wasn't a monster. She just wanted things to be perfect. Was that so wrong? She shook the thought away. This was not a time for introspection. This was a time for action. She finished the letter, a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese, and printed it out. She put it in an official HOA envelope, sealed it with a flourish, and addressed it to the residents of 1222 Elm Street. Her husband, Bob, came home a few minutes later, his cheerful whistling abruptly stopping when he saw her. "Patty, what happened to you? You're soaked," he exclaimed, his kind, bewildered eyes taking in her disheveled appearance. "The Ramans," she said, her voice a low, furious hiss. "They're a menace, Bob, a menace to the very fabric of this community. I was merely conducting an inspection, and I had a small accident." Bob's brow furrowed. "An accident? You fell in their pool, didn't you?" Patricia glared at him. "I did not fall. It was a failure of their shoddy construction. Their pavers are loose. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen." Bob sighed, a sound she had come to associate with his gentle but persistent disapproval. "Patty, we talked about this. You can't just go into people's yards. I am the head of the Architectural Review Committee. Bob, it is my job to ensure compliance. It's your job to send a letter, not to trespass," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. His words stung, a painful reminder of her own rashness, but she pushed the feeling down. This wasn't about her. This was about the sanctity of Glenwood Estates. This was about the rule of law. She would not be deterred. She would not be shamed. The Ramans had started a war, and Patricia Carmichael intended to win it. She would show them, and the entire community, that there was a reason she was in charge. She was a woman of principles, of order, and of relentless, unyielding determination. And she was going to make them tear that pool down, one regulation at a time. This was not just a conflict, it was a crusade. Her first act was to formally submit her findings to the HOA board, meticulously detailing the Ramans' violations. She would not mention her little accident. Instead, she would frame it as a matter of due diligence, a necessary step in her Patty's meticulously crafted email to the HOA board hit send with a satisfying ping, a virtual gavel of her authority. The report was a masterclass in bureaucratic indignation. She had artfully detailed the aesthetic blight of the Ramans' pool, the egregious safety violations of their low fence and unlocked gate, and the flagrant disregard for community standards in their choice of a vivid turquoise liner. The email, of course, made no mention of her impromptu swim. Instead, she presented her findings as the result of a rigorous, impartial inspection, a necessary act of due diligence. Her home felt like a command center. She sat at her mahogany desk, a fresh cup of tea steaming beside her, the 1222 Elm St. binder open to a new section. The Karen comment, though she tried to suppress it, gnawed at her. It was a slur, a dismissive label for women who simply cared about rules and order. But she would show them. She would prove that her actions were not petty or vindictive. They were a matter of principle. Her first volley was the formal letter, hand-delivered by her to the Ramans' mailbox, an official-looking envelope that practically screamed trouble. Inside, she had listed the violations with the precision of a legal brief, citing specific clauses from the HOAS bylaws. Article 4, Section 3B, regarding fence height, Article 6, Section 1A, concerning community, aesthetic harmony, and so on. She concluded with a demand for a written plan of action within 7 days, failing which she would recommend a fine of $500 per day. The next day her phone rang. It was Bob. "Patty," he said, his voice unusually strained. "The Romans just called me. They're upset." "Upset about what?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "About the letter. They think you're bullying them." "I am merely enforcing the rules, Bob. Rules that were voted on by the entire community. They're a nice family, Patty. The kids seem lovely. Maybe you could just talk to them." Talk to them. The thought was absurd. Talk was for people who didn't have meticulously documented evidence. Talk was for people who were willing to compromise. Patricia Carmichael did not compromise on community standards. "They have broken the rules, Bob," she said, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "A pool of that nature is a public hazard. Think of the children. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen." "Patty, you're the one who fell in," he said, his exasperation clear. The line went silent. The sound of her own humiliation echoed in her ears. "That was an accident," she finally said, her voice clipped. "And it's beside the point. The point is, they have to comply. End of story." She hung up, her heart pounding. The Romans had clearly been manipulating Bob. They were trying to use his soft heart against her, but she wouldn't be swayed. Her resolve, if anything, was strengthened a few days later. She received an email response from Mr. Roman. The subject line was your letter of concern." Her heart rate quickened. She opened it, ready for their pathetic excuses. The email was polite, but firm. Mr. Roman explained, in carefully chosen words, that he had checked the HOA bylaws and found no specific mention of pool fence, height, or color. He pointed out that their fence, at 4 feet, met all city regulations. He also attached an updated pool permit, now complete with the necessary forms, and a new drawing that, to Patricia's immense frustration, did not feature the cartoon sun. He even included a receipt for a brand new pool skimmer. He concluded with a polite but pointed sentence. "We are a peaceful family and wish to be good neighbors. We hope to resolve this matter without further conflict." The email, with its calm logic and irritatingly accurate citations, was a direct attack on her authority. She reread the bylaws, her fingers tracing the fine print. To her horror, Mr. Roman was right. The pool fence height was only mentioned in the context of city regulations, which he had met. The aesthetic harmony clause was, in retrospect, a bit vague. Her meticulously crafted legal argument was falling apart. A lesser woman might have given up. A lesser woman might have admitted she was wrong. But Patricia Carmichael saw this as a new challenge. The bylaws were flawed. They had a loophole, a weakness, and she was the only one who saw it. She would not fine them for breaking a rule that didn't technically exist. She would create a new one. She immediately drafted a new proposal for the HOA board. The subject line was resolution for the clarification of pool safety and aesthetic standards. The proposal called for a mandatory 6-foot fence for all new pools, a specified list of approved fence materials and colors, and a new regulation requiring pool gates to be self-latching. This, she reasoned, was not about the Romans. It was about protecting the entire community. It was about preventing another accident like hers. Her phone rang again. It was the HOA president, a man named Gerald who was fond of long, rambling stories about his grandchildren. "Patty," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious, "I'm looking at your new proposal, and I've also had a very polite but very concerned call from the Romans." "Gerald, this is for the good of the community," she said, her voice tight with tension. "The bylaws are a joke. We need to close these loopholes." "I understand that, Patty," he said slowly, "but the Romans have done nothing wrong. They've followed every rule. You can't just change the rules to punish one family." "It's not to punish them, Gerald," she insisted. "It's to protect everyone. A child could fall in that pool." "A child hasn't fallen in," he countered. "An adult has, and she was trespassing." The word trespassing hit her like a physical blow. It was the word that would haunt her. The board, she realized with a cold dread, was siding with the Romans. Her reputation, her authority, was on the line. She spent the next few days in a state of quiet fury. She felt isolated, misunderstood. She started to see the Romans' family gatherings in a new light. The sound of their laughter, the smell of their cooking, it wasn't just noise and smells anymore. It was a victory dance. They were celebrating her defeat. Driven by a need to reassert her power, she decided to escalate. If the board wouldn't act, she would. She would go straight to the city. She made a phone call to the city's zoning department, a new front in her war. She anonymously reported a non-compliant swimming pool at 1222 Elm Street, providing a list of all the technicalities she could find. Maybe the city, with its impartial, unfeeling bureaucracy, would be the ally she needed. A few days later, she saw a city vehicle parked outside the Roman's house. A man in a uniform was speaking with Mr. Roman, who stood there, a look of tired confusion on his face. Patty watched from her window, a morbid satisfaction spreading through her. They would see she was not a Karen. She was a force of nature, and she would not rest until order was restored. The next day, Bob came home, his face pale. "The Romans just got a notice from the city," he said, his voice barely a whisper. About their pool. It's a fine for some obscure plumbing code violation. Patty felt a jolt of triumph. See, Bob, I told you, it was a public hazard. The city agrees with me. But Bob just shook his head. They're heartbroken, Patty. They've spent so much on that pool, and the kids, they're so excited about it. They just want to fit in. Her triumph soured. A small, nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered that she had gone too far, that this was no longer about community standards, but about pride. But she pushed the voice down. This was the consequence of their actions. They had defied her, and now they were paying the price. This was a lesson, for them, and for the rest of the community. But as she watched the Rahman children peeking out their window, their faces dejected, she felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. Had she truly done the right thing, or had she simply become what they said she was? A single, lonely tear traced a path down her cheek, but she quickly brushed it away. There was no room for weakness. Not now, not ever. The battle was far from over. The letter from the city's zoning department landed in the Rahman's mailbox like a bomb. Patricia watched from her front window, a morbid sense of satisfaction curdling in her stomach as she saw Mr. Roman's shoulders slump when he read it. The city, that great, impartial arbiter of bureaucracy, had found an obscure plumbing code violation. It was a victory, but a hollow one. The fine was relatively small, but the implication was immense. They had to drain the pool, have a city inspector verify the repair, and then refill it, a costly and heartbreaking process, especially for the children who had been so excited. She saw the little girl, the one who had called her a Karen, standing by the fence, watching as two men began the slow, agonizing process of siphoning the water from the turquoise-lined pit. The girl's face was a mask of dejection, and a pang of something akin to guilt, but more accurately, regret, flickered in Patricia's heart. This wasn't about the pool anymore, it was about the family. She had gone too far, a part of her whispered, but the louder, more insistent part of her argued that they had brought this on themselves. They had defied her, and now they were paying the price. This was a lesson for them and for the rest of the community. That evening, her husband Bob came home, his face etched with a mix of anger and disappointment. Patty, he said, his voice low and dangerous, what you did was wrong. I did nothing, Bob, she said, her voice rising in defensive indignation. I simply made a phone call. The city found the violation, not me. It's their responsibility to follow the law. You did this? He insisted, his eyes boring into hers. You set out to make their lives miserable, and you succeeded. They just wanted to have a pool for their kids, and you, because of some bizarre vendetta, decided to make them an example. It's about the rules, Bob. The rules are there for a reason. The rules are there to keep things in order, not to be a weapon, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I saw their daughter today, Patty. She was crying. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? His words hit her like a physical blow. Her husband, her rock, was ashamed of her. The shame was a new feeling, a sharp, unwelcome splinter in her armor of self-righteousness. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. For the first time, she saw herself not as a vigilant protector of community standards, but as a bully, a lonely, bitter woman who used the rules to inflict pain. The next morning her phone rang. It was Gerald, the HOA president. Patty, he began, his voice devoid of its usual cheerful bluster. I'm calling to inform you of the board's decision. We've decided to postpone your proposal on the new pool regulations. Postpone, she sputtered. Gerald, you can't be serious. This is a public safety issue. The board feels, he continued, carefully choosing his words, that this proposal is a direct result of a personal dispute. We also believe that it's an overreach of our authority. We've decided to form a new subcommittee to review the entire architectural review process. The news was a gut punch. They were not just postponing her proposal. They were stripping her of her power, questioning her judgment, and creating a new committee to watch her every move. She was being marginalized, her authority dismantled by the very people she had tirelessly served. She felt a profound sense of betrayal. She hung up the phone, her hands trembling. She looked out her window at the Rahman's backyard. The pool was now a half-empty pit of sludge. The little girl was gone. She felt a sudden, fierce need to do something, anything, to regain control. Her carefully constructed world of order and rules was crumbling around her. She decided to fight back. She would go directly to the city council. She would rally the support of the community, the silent majority who she believed secretly supported her. She would expose the HOA board's weakness, their cowardice in the face of a perceived personal dispute. She would prove that she was a leader, not a Karen. She spent the next few days in a whirlwind of activity. She wrote a scathing letter to the editor of the local paper, decrying the HOA's inaction and the city's lax regulations. She created a petition for the safety of our children and began to canvass the neighborhood, clipboard in hand. She approached her neighbors, many of whom she had previously only interacted with via official HOA notices. The response was not what she expected. Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly woman who lived across the street, took the petition but refused to sign. Patty, I love you, dear, she said gently, but what you're doing to that nice family isn't right. Their children are so sweet, they bring me samosas sometimes. Samosas? The word hung in the air, a symbol of a connection and warmth that Patricia had deliberately She moved on, her heart sinking. Another neighbor, a young man with a new baby, listened to her pitch and then shook his head. Look, I've got a baby, he said, and I don't want a 6-foot fence. It's an eyesore. And what about the cost? We can't afford that. The petition was a failure. The community, the very people she had sought to protect, were not on her side. They saw her as a busybody, a troublemaker, not a hero. She was alone. Her final, desperate act was to attend the next city council meeting. She prepared a speech, a powerful, impassioned plea for stricter pool regulations. She arrived early, her binder of evidence clutched in her hand. But as she sat there, waiting for her turn, she saw Mr. and Mrs. Roman walk in. They didn't even look at her. They spoke to a city councilwoman, a compassionate-looking woman with a kind smile. They showed her a series of photos on their phone, photos of their children, their empty pool, and the notice they had received. Then, Mr. Roman spoke to the councilwoman, his voice low and steady. We just want to be good neighbors, he said. We've tried to comply with every rule, and we've been targeted because of one person's personal agenda. Patricia's blood ran cold. He didn't mention her name, but she knew. He was talking about her. She felt the weight of the entire room's disapproval on her shoulders. The councilwoman listened, her face sympathetic. She shook their hands, and, as they walked out, Mr. Roman turned and looked directly at Patricia. He didn't smile, he didn't scowl. He just looked at her with a quiet, sad certainty, and in that gaze, she saw her own defeat. She stood up, her binder slipping from her grasp, and scattering papers across the floor. The moment she had planned to speak, the moment she had prepared for, was gone. She was no longer an avenger. She was an outcast. She walked out of the council meeting, her head held high, but inside, she was a hollow, empty shell. The war was over, and she had lost. Patricia's defeat at the city council meeting was not a sudden, dramatic collapse, but a slow, creeping realization of her own irrelevance. The quiet, certain look in Mr. Roman's eyes was more powerful than any fiery public speech. It was the look of a person who had won not with force, but with quiet dignity. She had expected a fight, a battle of wills, but he had simply been a good neighbor, a caring father, and a man who had calmly navigated her storm of rules and regulations, and in doing so, he had exposed the one thing she had worked so hard to hide, her loneliness. She walked out of the council chambers and into the cool evening air, the weight of her defeat settling on her shoulders. Her binder, the symbol of her power, now felt like a heavy, useless burden. She drove home in a daze, the familiar streets of Glenwood Estates, looking alien and unwell. Her beige house, once a fortress of order, now felt like a prison. When she got inside, she found Bob sitting in the living room, a solemn expression on his face. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes was one of pity, not anger. That, she realized, was far worse. I went to the city council meeting, she said, her voice a hollow whisper. Bob nodded. I know. The Romans called me. They said they were sorry for you. Sorry for her. The word stung with a humiliating intensity. They were not gloating. They were not celebrating. They were simply sorry. It was a kindness she didn't deserve, and it was a kindness that broke through her brittle defenses. I tried to help them, she said, a flimsy, pathetic defense that even she didn't believe. I just wanted them to follow the rules. No, Patty, Bob said, his voice gentle. You didn't. You wanted to punish them. You wanted to win. Tears, hot and unfamiliar, began to stream down her face. She sat down next to him, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt her husband's arm go around her, a comforting weight she had pushed away in her relentless pursuit of control. I don't know who I am anymore, Bob, she sobbed into his shoulder. I'm just the Karen. That's all I am. You're not Patty, he said, holding her tight. You're my wife. You're the woman who used to make me laugh until my sides hurt. The woman who made the best meatloaf in the world. You're not a label. You're just lost. His words, a lifeline in her sea of despair, resonated with her. He didn't condemn her. He saw her. He saw the woman she had been, and he still believed in the woman she could be. The tears continued to flow, a cleansing torrent of emotion that washed away the anger, the pride, and the righteous indignation that had been her armor for so long. The next morning, she woke up with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in years. The world didn't look beige anymore. It looked colored. She saw the vibrant pink bougainvillea climbing her neighbor's fence, the cheerful yellow of a child's bike left on the lawn. For the first time, she saw the life in the community, not just the rules. She had to make things right. She had to apologize. It was a terrifying prospect. Apologizing for Patricia Carmichael was a foreign concept, a sign of weakness. But she knew in her heart that this was the only way forward. She put on a simple, conservative dress, took a deep breath, and walked out her front door. She walked a short distance to the Raman's house, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Mrs. Rahman in the front yard, watering a small rose bush. The woman looked up as Patricia approached, a flicker of surprise and wariness in her eyes. "Mrs. Rahman," Patricia began, her voice trembling slightly. I'm so sorry." Mrs. Raymond's brow furrowed. "For what, Mrs. Carmichael?" "For all of it," Patricia said, the words spilling out in a rush. "For the pool, for the letter, for the city. I was wrong. I was not acting in the best interests of the community. I was just being difficult. And for that, I am truly sorry." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Rahman put down her watering can and looked at her, a quiet, assessing look. "It was very hard on my children," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "They were so excited about the pool." "I know," Patricia said, her eyes welling up again. "I saw your daughter. I'm sorry I made her cry." Mrs. Rahman smiled a little, a sad knowing smile. "Sometimes, Mrs. Carmichael," she said, "we get so caught up in what we think is right that we forget what is kind." The words were a gentle reprimand, a perfect summary of her recent actions. They resonated with a truth that was both painful and liberating. "I want to make it right," Patricia said, her voice filled with a desperate earnestness. "I'll go to the city council. I'll tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I'll help you get the fine removed." Mrs. Rahman shook her head. "No, Mrs. Carmichael, you don't have to do that. We have already paid the fine. My husband is a proud man. He wants to move on." Patricia felt a fresh wave of shame. She had not only heard them, she had also underestimated them. They were not victims, they were survivors. They had weathered her storm and come out the other side, stronger and more dignified than she was. "I understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But if there's anything at all I can do, please let me know." Mrs. Rahman simply smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. "You can come to our next barbecue," she said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "We're having a pool party. You're welcome to come, as long as you promise not to fall in." Patricia laughed, a shaky, tearful sound that was filled with relief and a surprising sense of hope. "I promise," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I promise." As she walked back to her house, she felt a profound sense of peace. The world, her world, had shifted. She was no longer the all-powerful head of the Architectural Review Committee. She was just Patricia, and for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The war was over, but the journey of rebuilding had just begun. The pool party invitation, extended with a touch of good-natured mockery, was a turning point. Patricia, now simply Pat to Mrs. Rahman, and the rest of the community, felt a lightness she hadn't realized she'd lost. The rigid structure of her life, once a source of pride, now felt like a cage she had willingly built for herself. The Karen persona was shedding, like a snake's skin, revealing a person who was a little softer, a little more vulnerable, and a lot more human. She spent the week leading up to the barbecue in a state of nervous anticipation. What did one wear to a neighbor's pool party after trying to have their pool condemned? She settled on a simple, floral sundressa, conscious departure from her usual beige and navy palette. She even bought a housewarming gift, a beautiful, handcrafted wooden tray, a symbol of her desire to build bridges, not burn them. When she arrived at the Rahman's house, she was greeted by a symphony of laughter, music, and the delicious aroma of kebabs on the grill. The backyard, once a site of her personal shame, was now a vibrant tableau of community. Children, including the little girl who had called her a Karen, splashed in the pool, their happy shrieks a stark contrast to her memory of the sad, empty pit. Mrs. Rahman, her face wreathed in a warm smile, greeted her at the gate. "Pat," she said, using the nickname Bob had tried to give her so long ago. "I'm so glad you could make it. Come in, come in." Patricia felt a wave of relief wash over her. She handed Mrs. Rahman the gift, her hands trembling slightly. "For you," she said, "a housewarming gift. A little late, I know. It's beautiful," Mrs. Rahman said, her eyes genuinely sparkling as she admired the tray. "Thank you. Now, come, meet everyone." She was introduced to a whirlwind of family members and neighbors, all of whom seemed to have a story to tell or a joke to share. There was Mr. Rahman's brother, who regaled her with a hilarious story about a misadventure with a goat in Pakistan. There was a boisterous aunt who insisted on filling her plate with a variety of delicious, spicy foods. And there were the children, who, after a moment of shy curiosity, began to treat her not as a figure of authority, but as a new, interesting adult. The little girl, whose name was Zara, came up to her, a pool noodle clutched in her hand. "You're not a Karen anymore," she said, her voice a simple, honest statement. Patricia's heart squeezed. "No," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm not." She spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and even venturing a tentative dip of her toes into the pool. The water, she noted with a smile, was no longer a symbol of her defeat, but a testament to the Rahman family's resilience. She learned about their life in Pakistan, their hopes for their children, and the simple, human desire to build a good life in a new country. She saw them not as a public hazard, but as a family, just like hers. Bob arrived a little later, a look of quiet happiness on his face as he saw his wife, not just participating, but thriving in a social situation that once would have been an anathema to her. He watched her from a distance, a proud and loving smile on his face, as she listened intently to his story, her head tilted, her laugh ringing out, uninhibited and genuine. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the backyard, Patricia found herself sitting on the edge of the pool, her feet in the water, a plate of food on her lap. Mrs. Rahman sat down beside her, a look of contentment on her face. "You know," Mrs. Rahman said, "that word, Karen, I knew you weren't really like that. Not deep down. My mother always said, a person who is always looking for a fight is usually just looking for a friend." The words hung in the air, a profound and simple truth that resonated deeply within Patricia. She had been looking for a fight, a way to assert her control in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. But what she had really been looking for, what she had so desperately needed, was a connection. A friend. "Thank you," Patricia said, her voice barely a whisper, "for everything." Mrs. Rahman just smiled. "We are a family, Pat," she said, "and now, you are a part of it." The statement was not a literal one, but a metaphorical one. It was an embrace, an invitation into a warmth and a community that she had so vehemently tried to exclude herself from. It was a beautiful, powerful moment, a silent acknowledgement that the walls she had built around herself had finally come down. The party continued long into the night. Patricia stayed, laughing and talking, a part of the vibrant tapestry of the Glenwood Estates community. She had not only made peace with her neighbors, she had found a peace within herself. She had lost a battle, but in the process, she had won something far more valuable, her humanity. The Karen was gone, replaced by a woman who was learning to be a neighbor, a friend, and a human being. The journey had been difficult, but the destination, she realized, was more beautiful than she could have ever imagined. The morning after the barbecue, Patricia awoke to a silence she hadn't heard in years, the silence of peace. The previous day's laughter and warmth still lingered in the air of her home, a ghost of a life she was just beginning to reclaim. Made her coffee, the ritual now imbued with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just fueling her day, she was embracing it. Her phone rang. It was Gerald, the HOA president. Patricia braced herself, expecting more bureaucratic fallout. "Patty," he said, his voice hesitant, "I've been thinking about what happened. With the Rahmans, we were wrong to dismiss your concerns entirely. The bylaws are a mess. They need to be updated. The board and we've decided to move forward with a new subcommittee. We'd like you to head it up." The offer was a shock. It was her old world, her old power, being offered back to her. A few weeks ago, she would have accepted with a snap of authority, but now, she hesitated. "Gerald," she said, choosing her words carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I think I need to step back. I need to learn how to be a better neighbor." First, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I understand," he finally said, his voice filled with a genuine, newfound respect, "but the offer stands. When you're ready, we'll be here." She hung up, a sense of relief washing over her. She hadn't rejected her old self entirely, but she was no longer controlled by it. She was in a new place, a new person. That afternoon, she walked over to the Rahman's house. She saw Mrs. Rahman in the garden, and they talked for a while, sharing a pot of tea. They talked about the kids, about their gardening, and about the quirks of their husbands. It was a conversation without agenda, without a hidden motive. It was just two neighbors, two friends, connecting. "I have something for you," Mrs. Rahman said, and she went into the house, returning with a large, intricately embroidered tablecloth. "For your dining room, a gift from our family to yours." Patricia took the cloth, her fingers tracing the beautiful, vibrant patterns. It was a masterpiece of color and life, a stark contrast to her own beige home. It's beautiful," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "It will make your home a little less boring," Mrs. Rahman said with a playful smile. "But a little bit of color is a good thing, you know?" The words resonated deep within Patricia. It was a metaphor for her life. She had lived in a world of beige, a world of rules and conformity. But now, she was embracing the color, the vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful mess of real life. As she walked back to her house, the tablecloth draped over her arm, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had not only found a friend, but she had found herself. The Karen was gone, replaced by Patricia, a woman who was learning to laugh at herself, to forgive herself, and to live with an open heart. The story of Patricia Carmichael's fall into the pool became a legend in Glenwood Estates. It was told with laughter and affection, a cautionary tale that had an unexpectedly happy ending. But for Patricia, it was more than a story. It was the moment her life changed. The moment she fell, and in falling, finally began to rise. The end of the story, however, was not really the end. Change is a difficult, ongoing process. The next week, Patricia found a small, misplaced garden gnome on her front lawn. It was a simple mistake, a gnome from the neighbor's house, perhaps, but for a fleeting moment, she felt the old Patricia, the HOA arbiter, rise up. Her hand twitched, reaching for her phone. Then she stopped. She took a deep breath, smiled, and picked up the gnome. She walked it over to the neighbor's house, not to issue a warning, but but to deliver a gift. She was still Patricia, still a little bit of a stickler for the rules. But she was also learning that some things, like a shared laugh and a misplaced gnome, were more important than a perfect lawn. The journey, she realized, was far from over. It was just beginning.